Thanks so much for attending. A couple of quick things before I get started. This is not one of those presentations where the speaker doesn't want you on your phones. I want everybody to get on their phones, get on the Gamification Summit platform to tweet as much as possible. I won't be handing out slides, so if you hear anything that you like, write it down, take notes, tweet away. My Twitter handle is here. So I'm going to be talking today. Hey, everybody. Come on in. I'm going to be talking a bit about WTF businesses. And so these are the businesses that we all saw a few years ago. And they started out as a toy. And they all have the same characteristics of getting users to do really amazing, strange, unexpected behaviors, right? These are things that businesses that we saw for the first time, and then a few years later, we turn around and they're multi-billion-dollar businesses. Can I get a few? What kind of businesses come to mind when I mention that description? I has cheese. Okay, that's great. There's one. What else? What else? Foursquare. That's a great one. What else? Zynga. What other multi-billion-dollar companies? Facebook. Instagram. Exactly. These are all companies that we saw these companies emerge as unusual behavior drivers, and we first scratched our head and said, how do they do that, right? What's going on there? And so that's the focus of my talk, and what I study. I look for patterns. I look for behavior design patterns in these companies. My last company, which was sold back in August, was at the intersection of advertising and gaming, and so I had this really interesting vantage point of having a front row seat to see how companies engineer behavior. And so when I started to look for these patterns, I asked this common question. Are these companies selling vitamins or painkillers? You know, one of the biggest reasons that a new company or an investment gets dinged is that investors and VCs, they want to invest in companies that are painkillers, because as we know, painkillers are businesses that address obvious needs, right? They stop immediate pain. They address quantifiable markets, and they're instantly instantly monetizable. As opposed to vitamins, vitamins are about satisfying emotional needs, right? It's not about efficacy. It's about the fact that it makes you feel better knowing that you're taking this vitamin. So this is the kind of business that generally investors don't like to invest in, these vitamin businesses that are nice to haves with unknown markets. So here's the question. The companies that we discussed, these multi-billion-dollar companies today, what are they? What are they selling? Vitamins or painkillers? They all started as toys. How many people here think it's vitamins? They sell vitamins. Okay? About a little more than half. What about painkillers? Who thinks they're selling painkillers? A lot less. Okay, well, let me posit this thought before you make up your mind. A habit is when not doing something causes you pain. Okay, a habit is when not doing something causes you pain. If everybody, let's do a little exercise here. Everybody close your eyes for a second. Think about wherever your phone is. If it's in your pocket, maybe if it's in your hand still. And imagine that there's an email or an SMS waiting for you right now. I hear some giggling, right? Do you feel that little bit of tension? Do you feel that little bit of pain? That's a habit, that impulse. If I said you cannot check that email, you will feel a little bit of pain that you can't actualize that behavior. So given that information, my question was actually a tricky one. What I posit today is that the companies that successfully create habit-forming technology move us from pleasure-seeking behaviors, from selling vitamins, to selling pain alleviation. Painkillers, right? They create the need, and they sell the remedy. Okay? This is a common characteristic among habit-forming companies. Now, sorry about the formatting in this one. So this is what Ian Bogost talks about as the cigarette of this century. But it's not necessarily bad. As Peter Thiel once said, we wanted flying cars, but instead we got 140 characters. I think that this technology and the ability to create habits through technology is simply the tip of the iceberg. So the utilization of persuasive technology has been used for informational purpose, for entertainment purposes, and at times for nefarious purposes. I think it's time that we change the world by changing behavior. And for the first time, that's possible. And so the reason I do this research and the reason I give these talks is so that we can start engineering behavior to start creating products that help us all. So we start with this question: how do we engineer behavior? How do we engineer automaticity? Automaticity is an automatic response to stimulus. How do we create that? And my answer to that is the desire engine. The desire engine moves users within the flow of the product experience from external triggers to internal triggers. They align users along the path of mastery. And so we're going to dive into this. So the desire engine, like a 4-stroke engine, has 4 phases. Begins with a trigger, an action, a variable reward, and a commitment. So let's go through each phase. Triggers. Okay, triggers are cues that come right before an action. So toss out some triggers. What are some things that come right before an action in your life? Let's hear some. What's that? Food, right? Smells of food. Anything else? What else triggers you to act? The phone, of course, absolutely. What else? Alarms. Fantastic. So these are all great examples. Triggers fall into 2 categories: external triggers and internal triggers. So we've got alarms, as someone mentioned, calls to action, emails. Internal triggers are emotions, routines. Now, the biggest difference between an internal trigger and an external trigger is that an internal trigger, the context of what to do next is inside the user's brain. Okay, so external triggers tell us what to do. Internal triggers, we know what to do, and the cue gets us to act next. Now, the eventual goal, the path to becoming a pain-alleviating product, is to relieve negative emotion. Internal triggers tend to satisfy negative emotions. So when I feel dissatisfied, when I feel bored, when I feel lonesome, the context of what I do next is the product for many of these companies. Okay? So, and more research, actually very recent research in the past 2 years, shows that these negative emotions are very powerful internal triggers. So next is the action phase. Actions occur when doing is easier than thinking. Okay? This is where you get singular actions. Now, how many people have seen B.J. Fogg's behavior model? I'm guessing this crowd, a few of you. Okay, actually less than I would have thought. So this is a great framework that B.J. Fogg, who is a researcher at Stanford University's Persuasive Technology Lab, talks about. For seeing any singular behavior, you need B equals MAT. Okay? So for one behavior to occur, you need B, A, and T. That's motivation, ability, and a trigger. And what Dr. Fogg posits is that as long as you have sufficient ability, meaning something is easy enough to do, sufficient motivation, and a trigger is present, you will cross the behavior threshold and you will get a behavior. So let me give you an example. A phone rings and you don't answer it. Okay? Why didn't you answer it? What are some reasons? In the shower, so you didn't hear it. It was too difficult to get to the phone, and you couldn't, or maybe you did hear it, but you couldn't reach it because you were in the shower. What's another reason? You knew who was calling as a telemarketer, so the motivation was too low. And then, as far as a trigger is concerned, if you just didn't hear it because it was on silent, then there was no trigger present. So when we're designing a singular behavior, we have to make sure we have motivation, ability, and trigger at the same time, every time, for a singular behavior to occur. So what's important about this is how it maps onto your organization. So even if you know that to design an individual behavior, you need these 3 things to occur, the reason that cross-functional teams work so well is that we have these disciplines represented. So triggers are about interaction design, ability is about how easy the product is to use, and motivation is the realm of marketing. And so when we can get people from these 3 disciplines together, we can be more effective at driving individual actions. Okay, next is variable rewards. So we've all heard a lot about variable rewards in the conference. They're often discussed. Intermittent rewards are a very, very powerful motivator. But I think it's something that people aren't exactly sure how to use and where to use. And so I'm hoping that by introducing this desire engine model, you'll know the proper place to introduce them. But let's dive into a little bit of the history and why they work so we can use them properly. Intermittent rewards comes out of the work of B.F. Skinner back in the 1950s and 60s. And he saw that when he gave, in his case, he used pigeons inside his little Skinner boxes, he found that these pigeons would create desire, essentially. They would click more voraciously when the reward was not regular, right? So they would click, sometimes they would get food, they would click, sometimes there'd be no food, sometimes they'd get a large amount of food. Sometimes they'd get less food. And Skinner found that this is where he would create voracious clicking, right? Voracious emotion. So we see this all over the place. Wherever there's addiction and habits and desire, we see variable rewards. Now, why does this work? Right? So let's go a level deeper. Why does this work? Because we as a species, and many other species as well, seek to bring order where there's chaos. Right? We want to understand how systems work, and if we can't figure it out, it drives us nuts. We keep trying until we can figure it out. Turns out that dopamine, the chemical most involved in this variable reward system, is actually not about reward. We used to think that dopamine was the happy chemical that rewarded us. It actually doesn't. Okay? Dopamine is about the search. It's about the search. Mick Jagger was right when he said you can't get no satisfaction. That's absolutely right, because satisfaction is not biologically beneficial. What's beneficial is the search. So variable rewards fall into 3 types, where it's all about the search for rewards. They fall into these 3 categories of the search for rewards of the tribe, the search for rewards of the hunt, and the search for rewards of the self. So let's dive in real quick into those 3 categories. Rewards of the tribe are social. We see these all over the place in products that we use every day. These are about the search for rewards around acceptance, sex, power. Next is the search for resources. So the hunt, the endless search for resources regarding food, right? That started when our species 200,000 years ago on the plains of Africa was looking for resources. That got turned into the search for money, and money gets turned into the search for information. So when you hear about a news junkie, or when you find yourself endlessly scrolling on Twitter, this is the search for resources, the search for information. Okay? And then finally, the search for sensation. Right? So the hunt for rewards of the self is where a lot of the mechanics around game design occur. Right? So things that we do in isolation, where we're trying to master a system, control a system, where we have purpose around what we're doing, these are all rewards of the self. Okay? So the fact that when you check your email, you have this compulsion, this tiny pain to check all your unread messages, this is a form of mastery and control, just like levels in World of Warcraft might be. So the way we adjust these as we're designing our desire engines is we can change the type, the frequency, and the amplitude. So you can layer on multiple types of variable rewards, change how great the reward and how often the user receives the reward. Finally, the commitment phase. This is pretty different from a lot of the other stuff that's been done before, and I think it's a critical component about what's a fundamental piece of creating habits and creating desire. So the commitment phase is where the user does a bit of work. Okay? It's where they pay with time, money, social capital, data. It's the phase that comes where the user is starting to do a little bit of work. They start committing to the system. What's important about this is that it comes after the reward. Okay? It's different from the action phase, which is about the anticipation of future rewards. The commitment phase comes after the reward and is about future rewards. It's about anticipation of rewards. Okay? And just to illustrate, there we go. And just to illustrate a study that's been done about this, there was 2 groups in a study done actually in Palo Alto by Stanford researchers back in 1966. They asked 2 groups of homeowners to put up a horrendous, huge sign in their front lawns that said, "Please drive carefully." Okay? The first group, it didn't look exactly like this, by the way, but it pretty much said the same thing. The first group, 83% refused, said, "No way, you're not putting that on my lawn." The second group, 76% accepted and agreed to put it in their lawn. The difference was that with group 2, 2 weeks earlier, the researchers went to that group and said, "Would you mind if we put a 3-inch sign in your lawn?" 3-inch sign. Nearly 100% of the homeowners said, "Sure, no problem." It said on that sign, "Drive carefully," the exact same message as the huge sign. 2 weeks later, when they came back and they said, "Can we now put up that big sign?" 76% accepted. So what this informs us, it's an illustration of how tiny steps of commitment, tiny actions, which help us inform what we should do in the future, build commitment into the system around anticipation of future actions. So this is a great illustration about the crazy logic of commitment, and a hat tip to Jesse Schell, who talked about this in one of his talks. This is what the user is going through in their mind as they're making a decision around commitment. Basically, they're asking themselves, is this a good decision, right? Should I spend time, money, effort on this? The next thing they're saying is, well, only an idiot would spend on something not good. And since I'm not an idiot, and I spent on this in the past, the decision is a good one. So it's illogical in its circular nature, but this is what's happening in the user's mind. And so what we learn from this is that consistency is a cognitive hack. That taking these tiny steps of commitment makes it more likely for the behavior to occur in the future. It's a shortcut. So remember, in this phase, the most important thing is that commitments make the next action more likely. They're not about immediate rewards. For those of you who are here Tuesday for Gabe's class, Gabe talked about how paying or subscribing is not an action. Okay? And I totally agree with him. It's not an action. It's a result of engagement within the system. So this is the Desire Engine canvas. It's meant to be painted upon as are all canvases. It's something I hope you'll use as a tool to change behavior and change the world, to make products for good for all of us. And so as a quick run-through of how to actually use this in practice, the first thing to do is start with the internal trigger, right? What's the emotion, what's the internal trigger that you're starting with that the user will use eventually? Okay, we're starting with the ends in mind. Next, the external triggers. So every product needs to be exposed to users for the first time. How will you reach your user with an external trigger? And how will you explain what the product is for? Next, we want to have very simple, concrete actions. Remember that these desire engines are done in series. So one desire engine for every single action. Okay? And those actions need to be very clear, very defined, and very simple. And finally, and then variable rewards. How can we mix the type, the frequency, and the amplitude of these rewards? And then finally, commitment. What can we do to make the next cycle more likely? Okay, so use this for good. Again, to reiterate, there's a simple test that we can take when we're designing systems. Would we use it? So I encourage you, these are powerful tools to create behavior. We need to make sure that we use these systems for good. And the test for that is, would you honestly use that system? So I don't have much time, unfortunately, but I do have a quick, before we get into questions. So everybody take out their phones. Can you do me a favor? Take out your phones, or if you're on your laptop, if you've got it, type in this URL. While I did say that I won't be handing out the slides, you can instantly download these slides by filling out my quick survey. So it's a 5-question survey. Just go to opinion2.us. 5 questions. I would love to hear critical feedback, positive feedback, whatever you want. And if you fill out the quick 5-question survey, you get entered into a drawing to win any book from my recommended reading list, which is at nirandfar.com. Somebody from this room will win a book. And thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Nir. And thanks for ending early enough for us to take some questions from the audience. Lots to think about here. Anyone have a question?
Is there a what?
Anyone else got a question? No?
So, I apologize also that the time was so short. There's a lot more at nirandfar.com, and this is an hour presentation that I kind of condensed into 18 minutes. So
two quick questions. Are you going to write a book, and have you deviated from Fogg's thing at all?
Oh, so BJ's work is actually a critical component to the Desire Engine with that action phase. So I wouldn't say I've deviated. I'm trying to add to the conversation. I'm trying to add future models that can incorporate not only BJ's work, but the work of Amy Jo Kim and Gabe, and gosh, there's so many people that I'm trying to make a useful kind of framework to help us entrepreneurs fail less. So I'm trying to expand on what's been done to make those tools more and more concrete for creators like ourselves. And then, am I going to write a book? I'm not sure. Maybe I should. Working on it.
Anyone else have one last question?
Oh, yeah, that's you put in my email address. It's just www.nirandfar.com.
Great. Well, I think that's about our time. So thank you so much, Nir.
Thank you.